What's going on, guys? Mark here from QuadLogic FPV, my channel dedicated to FPV quadcopters where I build, fly, and evaluate their performance to share with you. My motto here is build it, fly it, love it. In this video, I'll be building the GEPRC DX-4, a 4-inch toothpick quad. And the model number on paper is the GEP DX. As you can see, I have all the components laid out here on my desk. I have the arms, the bottom plate, the middle plate, and this model has a TPU molded canopy that goes on top. And with this frame, I have all the screws here for it, a couple of antenna tubes, and 2 battery straps plus a battery pad. I'll be building this setup with a GEMCU F722 all-in-one flight controller ESC at 40 amps and 45 amp burst current max output. Other components I'll be using include the LAN-RC 1505 3750 kV4S motors, a Caddx Baby Ratel 2 nano camera to fit inside the canopy. And I wanted the build to have video recording capability, so I chose the AKK Ultimate DVR VTX, which is a 40-channel 1-watt video transmitter with a 20x20 mounting pattern. The unit came with this whip antenna, but I think I'll be using something else. I'll be doing a time-lapse video of this build, a comprehensive walkthrough, so without further delay, let's get into it. I'll start by attaching the 4mm thick arms to the mid and bottom plates. It is interesting that the arm screws are attached top down and bottom up on this frame. And with the first one now in place, it should be easy to add the others. So this is what the frame looks like. It's just 4 arms between 2 plates. Next, I'll put my stack screws in, which will form the columns for the remaining components that will be mounted on top. Next, I'll mount the flight controller, the brain of the quad. Here I've met the first problem. It doesn't go all the way down. I'm also noticing that the bottom of arm screws are protruding too far up, which can cause a short if any of them come into contact with the underside of the flight controller. I'm going to fix this by grinding off the excess length of the screws. Alright, this looks much better. Let's try fitting the flight controller again. Okay. The pin connector for the digital VTX is now preventing the flight controller from going down any further. And seeing that this is an analog build, I actually don't need this pin connector. So I'm going to remove it. I just hope I don't regret it. Now I can actually rotate the flight controller to its proper orientation, something that the connector was preventing me from doing because of where it was. Nice. So, as for the motors, we have 4 of them. They're not too difficult to put on. And as you can see on this frame, each arm has only 3 holes for mounting the motors. That takes care of the 4 motors. Now what I want to do is mount the FPV camera onto the TPU canopy and attach the wires for connecting it to the board. I want to make sure that the MMCX SMA antenna also fits inside the canopy. This is my VTX unit, and the canopy is going to be on top like so, with this part at the front. So I want to make sure that I'll have no issues with the length of the antenna connector. This little stubby antenna is looking really good. Okay, let's connect the camera wires. We're going to insert the camera into the canopy and secure it with the screws. All right. Let's put the camera aside. And now what we want to do is get the motor wires connected. And going by the orientation of the flight controller, we have motor 1, 2, 3, and 4. I like to wrap my motor wires onto the arms. Next, we're going to solder the motor wires onto the ESC, and then we're going to tin the pads for the camera, for the receiver, and the video transmitter. To connect the motor wires, I cut them to a length of my liking and tin them independently, and also the pads that they'll be connected to. I am using the Qwad SP120 soldering paste. And the reason I'm using this is to make sure that my solder takes well to the surfaces that I'm putting them on. And the reason why I'm using the brush is because I'm trying to use the soldering paste sparingly. Here we go. Let's look at how we've done. It's not bad. It's clean. There's not a lot of play on my cables. I actually don't like leaving too much available. Now that I've got one motor connected, I'm going to do the rest of them off camera and come back and look about the other components. So this is where we are. And this is what it looks like after I've applied the solder to each motor. And of course, I tried to make the connections clean as best as I could. Now this is actually starting to look like a quad. Now we're going to give some attention to the other components, starting with the camera, the receiver, and the video transmitter. On this board, the camera is attached to these 3 soldering pads here. The VTX is connected to these 4, and the receiver just happens to be on this side of the board here. So the wiring for the FPV camera only has 3 leads. And as you can see, they're not very long. I'll first cut the pin connector off and strip the wire to tin the ends. Let's tin the pads as well. Actually, let's also tin the other pads for the VTX and the receiver while we're here. Looking good. While I'm at it, let's also get the receiver out and figure out where I'm going to mount it. On the arm right here looks to be a good spot, and I can keep the wires short. I also have to make sure that my wiring is correct, with the ground wire in line with the bind button UFL connector. Then it's a 5-volt in, TX, and RX. These wires come pre-tinned, so I just have to solder them to the receiver. Because this quad is small and light, I trim off all the excess wiring to save on weight. Now, let's get these wires connected to the flight controller in their proper order. The TX on the receiver will go to the RX on the flight controller, and the RX to the TX, otherwise it won't work. I usually follow wiring diagrams provided by the manufacturers for the components just to make sure that I have things correct. Somehow I lost the footage for connecting the VTX, so I'm just going to show how it's supposed to be wired. This is a capacitor that came with the flight controller ESC. This is the XD60 and how long I want the leads for this build to be. Let's mount them. I found a potential problem where one of the screws securing the VTX is touching the negative power lead. I'm going to have to remove the screw. And just to mitigate the possibility of other potential issues, I'm putting a sheet of silicone between the VTX and the flight controller. That should do it. And now to secure the VTX. Almost there. Looks good. The last section that you saw, I was putting on the top canopy and I was trying to configure how to put the antenna, the capacitor, as well as the receiver here. So off camera, I put them on. But I've left a few things in place just to give you an idea of some of the decisions I made for getting things to this point. So initially, I had this TBS Immortal T antenna just sitting behind here on the quad, bracing against these two posts, this one and this one. But it was hanging over the propellers just a little bit too much for my liking, and I've since changed that because it left a big bulk of the wiring coming out this way. I've decided to double the cable back into the opening here and leave it with just enough lead to connect it to the receiver here once I'm done. And you'll also notice that I've used zip ties to secure the antenna onto the canopy, but I left the ends dangling just so I could show you how I'm thinking. Of course, I'm going to cut them off now. There we go. Okay, here's a glimpse at what it's going to look like as far as the antennas are concerned. Video and control. So, I'm just going to remove this as we're not quite there yet. So, about all I have left to do is to secure the capacitor and the receiver. For the capacitor, this was how I approached it. So what I did, I got myself a zip tie and I made a loop like this, and I tied the loop around the body of the capacitor like this. Then I got another zip tie, and the idea was to run this one around the arm of the quad and through this one attached to the capacitor, linking them like a chain. After tightening them both, they work well together to keep the capacitor from moving. And with that done, I can now cut off the ends of the zip ties, and that takes care of the capacitor. Now the other issue I was having was the fact that these 20mm screws that run from the bottom of the frame all the way through to the top canopy were a bit too short. If you notice, they don't even come out on top of the canopy for me to secure it with any kind of nuts. And the one at the back doesn't even show through here. All I need are a few 25mm screws to secure the top canopy. I have the nuts for these, and these are the ones with the nylon inserts, nylon nuts. So what I'm going to do for now is go off camera. I'm going to replace these 4 screws with the 25mm screws that I have here, and then we'll be able to secure the top canopy. But the one other thing that I forgot to do was to add a buzzer, so I'll be doing that as well. I'm going to be mounting it somewhere under the canopy. I do have the leads ready to go here, and we're close to finalizing this build. I'll see you in a bit. According to the wiring diagram for this flight controller, the first groove on the side here is buzzer minus, and I have the ground lead cable here, and it's already tinned. It should fit into the groove quite nicely. And to connect the positive lead as well. I want to get this through the same opening as the ground lead. And again, keeping the wires short to save on weight. And in case you're wondering, yes, buzzers also have positive and negative ends, and this is a positive. Okay, I'm going to take a pause here. I'm going to connect the buzzer and I'll come back. All right, the buzzer is soldered on, and as you can see here, I've installed it. It's not secured with zip ties or screws per se, but I don't anticipate it coming loose, wiggling, or going anywhere. Now, as you can see, with the 25mm screws, they go all the way through the TPU, and I'm able to close it off with the nylon inserted nuts. As it is right now, this is basically what the quad is going to look like. So I'll be just a bit in finishing putting these nuts in place. Doing the sides are going to be easier. So the final nut will be the one on the back. I know it's really not going anywhere. Do I really want to put this final one on? Okay, here we go. And done. That's all I need. All right, so the last thing we're going to do is make sure that our antenna is connected. And there we go. And my goal is to make sure that it stays in place. Okay, I'm just going to heat shrink this in place and I'll be back. Okay, while that cools, this is what we have. As I mentioned, I do have some concerns about these antenna ends going down into the prop blades once they're on. So I've decided to take one of the antenna tubes and cut it in 2, and I'm going to insert one on each side, like so. While it may look weird, it is functional. So these will serve to stiffen up the antenna just a little bit more than usual. It will also protect these end caps from coming loose in the event they do get snagged by the propellers for any reason. The last 2 pieces were these 2 that I wanted to put on. And this is just the cool factor. Does it add weight? Yes, it does. Does it look good? To me, it does. All of this is functional. Let's put on my stubby antenna. So this is my quad, the GEPRC DX-4, the Dolphin X-Class 4-inch. I think it looks pretty cool. I'm going to get some double-sided tape and zip tie and secure the receiver. There you have it. Put this on, get a battery. All right, it works. So we have the receiver with the lights on, the VTX AIO, a solid quad, people. This is good. So as you can see, this is what the build actually looks like when it's done. I really like how it turned out. It looks totally amazing with the props and everything. I got the motor spinning properly and all that kind of stuff. But I forgot two things. One, I forgot to put the SD card in the VTX's DVR, so I'm going to have to remove this screw on the left side here to get to the card slot inside there, just above these two buttons. As well, I found a smaller 915 megahertz antenna that can work with this. So as opposed to having the long TBS antenna sticking out, I'm going to run it, and it's short enough to fit right where this receiver is. So I'm actually going to take out the big one and run this one on the back. It's going to look something like this instead. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take these off. I'm going to put the card in and replace the bigger antenna for the smaller one. So give me a sec. I'll do it off camera and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. I'll be back. All right, guys, this is the post-production leg of this build. I replaced the long TBS Immortal T Antenna that was going across here with this shorter version right here. And I also managed to put in the SD card, which I initially forgot. So right now, this build is complete. Thankfully, it all worked out. It could have been neater, but all things considered, this is a hobby that we're in. It's all about making decisions, making compromises to get your build to work. So now I have a little bit of space inside, behind the camera, and for my antenna to work. I decided to leave these non-functioning antenna tubes on the back. I like it. I like it. Okay, the GEPRC Dolphin X4. Very nice. Very, very nice. And now I'm going to rip a few packs. I got a few CNHL 4S 850 mAh LiPos all charged up and ready to go. That's what we're going to do. If you made it through this whole video, thank you so much for staying with me. If you like the content that I am putting out here, I ask that you go ahead and hit that like button. Share the video as well if you're so inclined. Also leave a comment down below what you like or didn't like about it, and turn on notifications to be alerted of new videos when I do post them. Finally, if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please consider doing so, as I would love to have you on board. Thanks for watching, and until next time, build it, fly it, love it. Happy flying, everybody, and I'll see you in the next video.